Hey, welcome to another episode of 5 O'Clock Now. We talk craft beer, share stories, and perhaps I can pass on some knowledge which will help you on your craft beer journey. So today I got for you Maker's Mark Kentucky Bourbon. What? No, actually this is a gift. I want to give my wife a shout out, Jennifer Anaya. Thank you very much. These were some gifts given out to the Ingram Micro SMB Alliance. They're having their virtual virtual online conference early this week, and these were the gifts that are given out to their partners. So I'm very thankful, and I can't wait to try a little Maker's Mark in this wonderful glass by Corksicle. Look at that packaging. It's a whiskey cigar glass, and this is what it looks like. It's got a notch for your cigar and your whiskey. That's called multitasking. So thank you very much, SMB Alliance. Hope you have a successful conference. I think it's great that small business owners get together, share ideas, and all in the spirit of improving their business. Some of them family-run businesses, and improving profitability. So kudos to you and good luck. Speaking of family business, I love the story of Maker's Mark. Bill Samuels in the early 50s took a family recipe that was 170 years old, and by accident the drapes caught on fire and burned up the recipe, but he remembered bits and pieces of it. His passion to produce a bourbon that didn't blow your ears off led him to reformulate and come up with his own recipe. And his wife Margie put the finishing touches on the bottle, literally, because she had the idea to hand finish each of the bottles by dipping them in red candle wax. And her thinking was that the bottle would sit on the shelf and you would recognize it, and you would buy that bottle, and that you would buy it a second time, because after you had Bill's bourbon, you would buy it again. So they revolutionized the bourbon industry at the time, and they've got a great story, and every great story needs your signature, so you'll see it on there. I'm gonna enjoy my Maker's Mark and my cigar a little bit later. Good luck, Ingram Micro SMB Alliance. So what I have for you today is actually a little bourbon. So transitioning, I have for you Firestone Walker 2020 release of Parabola. It's their bourbon barrel aged Imperial Stout. So it's a limited release. It comes out once a year around January. It's June. You're not going to find it out there right now, but luckily I bought a few of them when we were going down in lockdown. I bought a few in mid-March. So I had this one. I just thought I'd like the story behind, similar to Maker's Mark, and it's a bourbon barrel aged. Let me tell you the story about Firestone. Again, family business. It was started up by Adam Firestone and David Walker. And you may have heard that name before, Firestone. Well, Adam Firestone is the great-grandson of Henry Firestone of Firestone Tires, yes. And Adam's grandfather, his name was Leonardo, and he ended up buying a bunch of land in the Central Coast in the early 70s, and he started a winery, a vineyard called Firestone Wines. Perhaps some of you have heard of them and had their wine. Wine is like beer, beer is like spirits, spirits is like beer. It's not your daddy and grandpappy's beer. Beer is different today, and Firestone really led the charge with their barrel aging program. So actually Adam worked for his dad Brooke and his grandfather Leonardo, and grew up on a vineyard, so he understood making wines. His brother-in-law David Walker is an Englishman, married to one of his sisters. Those two gentlemen couldn't be more different. So David's influence, he really has the influence on the beer with his English background. And Adam, growing up on a vineyard, understood the logistics, the operations, how to support the brewery. So together they made music. They're fantastic. And so on the packaging, you can see Adam is the California bear, and David, with his British background, is the English lion. And together they are Firestone Walker. They started in 1996, as I mentioned, and they actually started their brewery in a shed on the vineyard in Buellton, California. And the first beer that they made was called DBA for Double Barrel Ale, and it was inspired from David's English heritage. It was inspired by an English pale ale, and English pale ales are brewed traditionally with what's called a multi-vessel wooden wooden fermentation system known as the Burton's Union. It's a 150-year-old fermentation system using these different barrels that brew traditional English ales. And so they wanted, Firestone Walker wanted to brew traditional beer, traditional English beer. So they kind of did their own spin on it and took bits and pieces of that Burton Union system and created their own double barrel system, 260-gallon double barrels. And they went ahead and patented that. And a lot of brewers, commercial brewers, didn't use this Burton Union system, especially in the United States, because it was English and it was very cost and labor intensive. And so, but Firestone Walker, they had the vision, and their mission is beer before glory. So it's always about the beer. They did whatever they needed to do about the beer. Cost was not an issue. It was all about producing a traditional English style ale that they called Double Barrel. This was their flagship. And they were a local brewer, and it was a very good beer. And the reason I know that is in 98 and 99, I was up in the Central Coast managing wholesalers for Boston Beer Company. I was selling Sam Adams, and I would sell against these guys, and they were the local craft brewer. You know, hey, support your beer. You saw that movie perhaps called Sideways up on the Central Coast. This was right there in Buellton. And so all the retailers loved Firestone Walker. They had the name, and they had a great beer. And it was a different beer. It was way ahead of its time. So what happened is they had a vision, and they wanted to grow the brewery. So what they did, and maybe some of you at the Ingram SMB Alliance will recognize this, they needed to find a quality brewer, somebody that was going to elevate their game to the next level. So in 2001, coinciding with their move to Paso Robles to their own brewing facility, they hired Matt Brindleson. Matt Brindleson was an up-and-coming brewer. He had worked 5 years for Goose Island out of Chicago. And so they hired him to run their barrel fermentation program. They had a vision that they were going to be the preeminent brewers of barrel-aged beers. And so that's what this is. And that was their vision. And so 10 years later, from their start in 2006, they released what's called their Proprietors Vintage Series. So let's open this beer. And again, this is Parabola, and pretty cool packaging. I mentioned that their mission statement was beer before glory, and right there, beer before glory. Kind of cool. Let's take this out. Now, Parabola is notoriously the biggest beer of their Proprietors Vintage Series. Again, I mentioned these are barrel aged for a year in premium bourbon barrels. I'm gonna go ahead, and they recommend to serve this at 45 degrees to 55 degrees. Let it warm up. You can store this, you can drink it immediately, or you can store in a cool place in the cellar. It gets better with time. But look at that. Beautiful beer, dark, opaque. It's got a khaki foamy head, and definite hints of coffee, roasted coffee, chocolate, and black cherry. Now, what they say about this vintage, 2020, it's going to have secondary notes, and the secondary notes they say to look for is that they have tobacco, kind of ironically, tobacco, plum, caramel, and vanilla. So let's give this a go. Wow, amazing, balanced, very tasty. I can taste the black cherry, the chocolate, the roasted coffee, just a lot of amazing flavors that the bourbon barrels will impart on this beer. And it's just an amazing beer that is very complex, very smooth, go great with a cigar, a steak, or if you've got a mature palate like myself, you can enjoy it on its own. Now the great thing about Matt Brindleson is he came in, took David Walker and Adam Firestone's vision and took it to the next level. He created this series along with them, and for his efforts, Firestone Walker Brewing has been recognized as the mid-sized brewer of the year on 4 different occasions, in 2004, 2006, 2010, and 2012. Kudos to you, Firestone Walker. Also, Matt Brindleson has been named Great American Beer Festival Brewer of the Year 6 different times since his hiring in 2001, and he's been recognized as Brewmaster of the Year 3 times by the World Beer Cup. So without saying, the brewer is the rock star within a brewery. You have to have a creative guy who's, or woman, a brewer, who's gonna push the envelope, who is gonna be creative. And what Firestone Walker doing separates them from any of the craft beers in the US. So they have the preeminent barrel aging program using bourbon barrels. They also use other spirit barrels and wine barrels. So highly recommend. This is, again, a limited release beer. It comes out once a year. Parabola 2020. It'll come out first quarter, limited batches. So I highly suggest you looking for it first quarter of 2021. So if you like this video and you'd like to see more, go ahead and hit like, hit subscribe, and we'll catch you next time. Cheers.